morning, guys. Welcome. It's Wednesday. So, let me get this shared out to the community before I forget here. Let's see this thing take off. So, if you don't know me, I'm Marshall Burtcher, and I help codependents rediscover happiness after codependency, after the nightmare of narcissistic abuse. And I have a community. It's called Thriving Beyond Codependency Community, and it is where you can find shelter and understanding and compassion and support. Kind of like a surrogate family unit where you'll be seen and understood and supported in what you're going through and valued for who you are. So, let me get this shared out here. Boom. Because Facebook keeps moving things around, so that makes it even more fun. Good old change. Keeping us on our toes. Okay, guys. Alright. It's a good morning. Let's talk about this thing. This concept of our emotions and our sense of worth. Our sense of value. These two things are deeply interrelated. They go hand in hand. They're kind of the secret behind how we ignite a strong sense of self-worth. As part of the real challenge with codependency, with negligence, even healthy parents, or just ourselves, we're not really good at respecting or valuing, appreciating our feelings. A lot of times we feel like feelings are the problem, so we got to solve the feeling. We got to get rid of the feeling. We got to eliminate the feeling or something. And we get really fixated on the wrongness of what we feel. We believe that this wrongness compels us, we believe the wrongness makes us unworthy in some way, or it makes us a burden, makes us too sensitive or too much, that we shouldn't feel what we do about whatever it is we're feeling, whatever it is we're feeling something about, right? And so this kind of antagonistic relationship with their emotions creates an inner division, and it creates questions and doubts within inside ourselves. It's like, am I supposed to be feeling this way? Is what I'm feeling the right feeling? Should I feel differently? Things like that. And this creates an enormous amount of friction within ourselves and what I call self-abandonment. Right? We're not receiving ourselves. We're pushing ourselves away. We're like, this is wrong. We should feel differently. We're not able to listen and hear ourselves. And this is especially important if you're dealing with the aftermath of narcissistic abuse or neglect of any kind, childhood emotional neglect, or you find yourself resonating with codependent behaviors like people-pleasing, fixing, enabling, controlling, things like that. Because what's going on is you have unmet needs crying out for attention, crying out for validation, crying out to be nourished and met. And that shows up in both our behaviors and in our emotions, right? Well, hi, Michelle. So if we have a relationship to ourself or emotions from a value center or like a sense of worth that says my feelings are a problem, or I'm a problem, or I don't matter, or I'm unworthy, then we're going to interpret the validity of our emotions through that lens, and that's going to lead us to have a different kind of experience with them. Internally, if I respond to my feelings from a sense of shame or worthlessness, then the voices that start coming into my head, the way I see things, the way I talk to myself, the way I express those feelings, are going to be typically very problematic because they're going to be driven from the shame, right? And that's also going to create this outcome or vision of things that are scary. And they lead me to choose people, places, and things that may not actually align with me in a healthy way. I may choose what's familiar, for instance, rather than what is healthy. Because often for those of us that are survivors of this kind of neglect and abuse, what's familiar and what's healthy are very different things, right? And healthy is uncomfortable because now we're having to confront that vulnerability and being seen, and learning to receive nurture and nourishment from others. Well, when I was going through my own work, my own healing with this, I kept hitting this really huge barrier with myself around my feelings, because my feelings were being interpreted through this shame spectrum, and I would try to fix my behaviors and I would try to fix how I feel, but I would not necessarily receive and ally with what I feel. I wasn't on my own side, for instance. And this just kept me in this perpetual loop of trying to fix myself and having painful results and not feeling really seen, feeling very scared to be myself, things like that. That shifted when I changed the lens. Okay, the lens is this sense of value we apply to ourselves. So at that point in time, I was applying shame to my sense of value, like I'm a shameful person. Well, I switched it out. At that time, I switched it out with compassion, and I started to respond differently to my feelings and to the needs that were expressing those feelings. And then suddenly my behaviors shifted. The way I anticipated what other people would say and do changed. Started changing who I chose and in who I chose to meet my needs with or through. I started treating myself with more respect. I started to legitimize what I felt and realize that my feelings and my needs are fully legitimate. And that came through that lens of compassion, which expanded into a larger lens of love and joy for who I am. And that joy became this really safe container for me to experience everything I feel, whether it's shame, guilt, fear, or fatigue, whether it's joy or boredom or happiness or curiosity or fear or trauma. That became a very safe container for me to which to receive and understand what I was feeling. And that changed my world, because that fundamentally became the healing point of the rest of my codependent programming. Because internally I started speaking to myself with much more compassion and much more kindness and playfulness and love. My behaviors shifted to more direct, simple, and clear advocacy, where I could just simply ask for what I needed. I still had fear. I still had anxiety. Sometimes I still do about doing those things. Yet it wasn't as intense, and along with that was more confidence and a more resiliency to rejection and a more resiliency to acceptance. I expanded my capacity to tolerate connection in a healthy way. All because I changed out my, what I call, dominant value about myself, my dominant sense of worth. I switched it from shame to compassion, and then it evolved into joy. Guys, this is the secret to it all, right? If we want to change how we're responding to life and how we feel about ourselves and how what we're receiving in our life, I suggest looking at the dominant value you hold about yourself. Because if it's fear or shame or guilt or fatigue or worthlessness, you're coming from a trauma state. You've gone through that discard cycle of being seduced and abused and discarded over and over and over. And that taught you to associate yourself with those feelings of shame, guilt, worthlessness, burdenship, things like that. If we switch that conditioning out to, hey, I'm a valid, loving, worthy, brilliant person, and my feelings matter to me. My validation, my experience is valid to me. My feelings are valid to me. My needs are valid to me. Then suddenly we're allied with ourselves, and we start to experience a completely different element of who we are. Instead of having that inner critic controlling everything, we start to find a loving inner parent emerge. We start to find ourselves speaking up for ourselves. We stop tolerating toxic behavior in relationships, and we start advocating for ourselves with healthy people. We start taking the risks that lead to real long-term change in our world. This is the relationship between our feelings and our worth. Because if we don't believe our feelings and our needs are valid, we see them as a problem, they need to be fixed, then our sense of worth is going to result in feeling shameful and like a burden ship. Now, if we honor our feelings, we legitimize them, we legitimize and value, cherish what we feel, and cherish our needs, and then our sense of value will align with that as well. Sometimes the hardest, as you can see, it's a loop, right? And so I start with switching the filter out with joy, or with at least compassion. It's like, hey, I can have compassion on this, and I can legitimize what I feel. And that starts to feed a different emotion into the loop that we have going on there. Because when I start to see my emotions as a legitimate experience, as a valid, as a valuable thing about me, then I start to feel more love about myself, more respect for myself, more compassion. And that feeds more love and compassion towards the feelings and needs, which feeds more love and compassion about myself. This is how innate value functions, guys. This is the secret to really making a huge transformation in your relationship with codependency, and with your relationship with your needs, your feelings, your wants, your desires, your boundaries. The whole thing is rooted in how we respond to and regard our emotions and our needs. So if you want that big, that's what we do in a happiness strategy. That's the entire point of the strategy, is to shift that experience and align us back with our true, what I call our true voice, which is a compassionate, direct, accountable voice. The voice is like, hey, yeah, we really feel this way and this matters. And then from there, we're able to advocate. And that's a healthy behavior. It's a healthy expression of ourselves, because we have a vision of us advocating with people and being, sometimes we'll be received, sometimes we'll be rejected, but in our vision, our perception of the world, we're able to handle that and receive that effectively. So this is the work, right? We go here, we target this. This is where the magic happens for us. Because codependency is not some product of immaturity. It's not some product of a disease or an identity or an addiction. It is a product of surviving neglect and having been conditioned to regard our emotions, our needs, and our wants as antagonistic, as shameful, as invalid, or illegitimate, or wrong. And we correct that by coming back to our innate value, feeding love into the system by bringing love into and towards our emotions and our needs. And then suddenly we start to feel more valid, more legitimate, more loving towards ourselves. Because that's what we're really looking for. So there you go, guys. That's today's training. I appreciate you. Thank you for being the badasses you are. Guys, remember that you're worth knowing, loving, and keeping. Keep yourself safe and healthy out there. And I will see you guys in next week's trainings. Bye-bye.